Good morning. In chapter 17, we saw the destruction of the Babylonish mysteries of the false church by the secular governments. It's kind of like that old John Lennon song, Come True, the one where he looks forward to a day when there would be no religion and the world can live as one. It's the search for utopia without God and without any religious trappings. Secular society, once dominated by the world's false religion, now is free to pursue its own agenda. It, however, cannot survive on its own. In chapter 18, we will see its end in a blaze of glory. In the previous chapter, the great and glorious city was the home of the whore drunken with the blood of the saints. In this chapter, the city, the secular power, is the habitation of devils and unclean and hateful birds. The stench of its own fornication with the whore is now revealed. Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 through 24. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with its glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hole of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird, for all nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God remembered her iniquities. Verse 6. Reward her even as she has rewarded you, and double unto her, double according to her works. In the cup that she has filled to her double. How much has she glorified herself and lived deliciously? So much torment and sorrow to give. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine. And she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. Stand afar off and fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all thy thyme wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of precious wood and brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, And all the things which were dainty and goodly departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was once clothed in fine linen, and in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company of ships and sailors and as many as trade by sea stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto the great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, the great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. Verse 20, Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and cast it in the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall the great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. The voice of harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpets shall be heard no more in thee, and no craftsman, whatsoever craft he be, shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all that were slain upon the earth. Well, at the beginning of this particular set of verses, in verses 1 through 3, we hear that Babylon the Great is fallen. This is a quote from Isaiah chapter 21 and verse 9. And he said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her gods he hath broken unto the ground. She has become the hold of every foul spirit. In Isaiah 13, the prophet sees a vision of the burden of Babylon. In verse 21, he states, But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. Speaking of the devastation that will take place on the world's power at the end time, Isaiah also says in Isaiah 34, 11 through 15, But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it. The owl also and the raven shall dwell in it, and he shall stretch out upon it a line of confusion and the stones of emptiness. They shall call the nobles thereof to the kingdom, but none shall be there, and all her princes shall be nothing. And thorns shall come up in her places, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof. And it shall be the habitation of dragons, and a court for owls. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island. And the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the screech owl shall also rest there, and find for herself a place of rest. There shall be the great owl make her nest, and lay and hatch, and gather under her shadow. There shall the vultures also be gathered, every one with her mate. Now, the kingdoms of the earth, according to this passage, have drunk the wine of her fornication, her false worship. The merchants of the earth have gotten rich through her financial system tied to her false worship. You know, an example of this can be seen in Acts 19:23 through 29, where it says, "And the same time there arose no small stir about the way, for a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, bought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with workmen of like occupation, and said, Sirs, you know how that by this craft we have our wealth. Moreover, you see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but all throughout Asia, this Paul hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods, which are made with hands, so that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all of Asia and the world worshipeth." 28. And when they heard these sayings, they were full of wrath, and they cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of Ephesus." And the whole city was filled with confusion. And having caught Gaius and Archelaus, men of Macedonia, Paul's champions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater. Man makes money off of false worship and makes merchandise off of man's weaknesses. The financial system as well as the government will fall. In verse 4, you hear the cry, "Come out of her, my people." God's people are commanded to reject the governmental system of Babylon and her false worship, her false system of worship, and her false economic system. Peter speaks to this when he says to God's people in 1 Peter 2, verse 9, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a particular people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light." The world systems and its entrapments are not where God's people are supposed to be. The people of God are to be cleansed and pure from the world and its system. In Revelation 3:5 it states, "He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels." This call is a call to remove oneself from the world and to become ready for the return of Christ. In verses 5 through 24 of the passage in chapter 18 of Revelation, we find the destruction of Babylon and its reasons for it. Here we will not spend much time in the destruction of Babylon, the Romish system, nor the reasons why. It's clear that this will happen. It should be clear why it happens by now. The destruction of the drunken woman, the false church, has caused the world system to reel and mourn from her destruction. They realize, these people, that their system is based on this false system of worship and cannot survive without it. The world system is destroyed. Well, reasons for destruction. Verse 5, it says, her sins have reached all the way to heaven. Verses 6 through 7, it says, she has lived well at the destruction of others. In verse 24, it says, they should be destroyed because of the blood of the saints. Well, we know that her sins have caused her destruction. We know that the destruction is swift, according to verses 8 through 10 and verse 17. This destruction causes the mourning of kings and merchants of the earth. Verses 9 through 16 and verses 17 through 20. The destruction is complete. There's nothing left. There's only the place for screech owls and destruction, according to verses 21 through 23. Now, in conclusion, the Babylonish world system of government, its economy, and its religion, which has survived the four different world-dominating powers, the last being Rome, shall be destroyed. Rome and its various manifestations down through the ages will eventually destroy its own religious system, which caused it to stay afloat. In the end, the government and the economic system which depended on the false worship will be destroyed quickly. The message to God's people is the same as it has been since John was on Patmos and penned these words from the angelic messenger of Revelation 18. Come out of her, my people.